Welcome back, everybody, to conversation number 85, Unlocking Success, Empowering Your Organization and Career Through Data Literacy with Joe Miscavige. But before we get started, as always, we have to thank our sponsors and introduce some announcements and reminders. First of all, we want to thank Conductrix, who've been with us from the very beginning, and we want to thank our newsletter sponsors. So Conductrix happens to be one of those newsletter sponsors, as well as EPO, Growth Book, and AB Smartly. And we also want to thank Convert and Blazing Growth, who are our community sponsors. So thank you all very, very much. Couldn't do it without you. Next up, reminder, registration is open. Super early bird registration ends November 1st, so that time's ticking. Go check it out. But also early bird registration December 1st. So head over to experimentationisland.com, or if you want a short, bit.ly EI 2025. And I happen to know, because I am the inside track, we have yet another new song that is going to be released on Monday, introducing one of our new singers, and it's quite amazing. Let me just say it's out of this world. That's your little hint. So stay tuned for that. Go check it out. You're really going to enjoy it. Next up, Aaron Weigel and Lucas are doing the Good Experimental Design Workshop. That is in January. It's at bit.ly good design. Let me move this out of my way. Good AB design. And you can sign up and register now. You just put down your $10 hold your place for that. And that is based on Aaron's Design for Impact, which if you haven't read it, I highly, highly, highly recommend it. And it's full of excellent toolkits and fantastic things to help you, well, have good experimental design. And then Jill Quick has the Google Analytics 4 fundamentals, and you can go to bit.ly GA4Jill. So, Joe, what can we say about Joe? It is my pleasure to introduce someone who knows a thing or two about turning data into compelling stories. Joe can convince anyone of anything. Asked me sometime about the time he tried to convince me to drink Malort, and it was very challenging to do, but he did convince me, and I still regret it to this day. From PBS to AMC networks, and even as a teacher in Japan, Joe's career journey has been as diverse as his skill set. In addition to his work with PBS and the Smithsonian, Joe teaches at Georgetown University, where he helps shape the next generation of data-driven thinkers. He's been recognized by us, his peers, as well. He earned the DAA Practitioner of the Year Award in 2018. But don't let all that professional success fool you. He also struggles to serve a tennis ball. He says tennis is harder than it looks. And when he's not analyzing data or hitting tennis balls, he's busy eyeing a tall stack of books he wishes he had already read. So please join me in welcoming Joe Miscavige. And if you're ever in Chicago with him, stay away from the Malort. Trust me on that.
Never.
Let me stop share and let you take it away.
Thank you so much for that warm introduction, Kelly. Also, I strongly recommend drinking Malort. It's delicious. So yes, as Kelly said, my name is Joe Miscavige. I am the Director of Data Analytics and Insights at the Smithsonian. One thing I did want to sort of get out of the way, in the spirit of testing and learning, the last few times I've done this, people come up to me afterwards and they're like, hey, what is PBS? Why do you keep talking about it? So I just wanted to get out of the way right at the beginning that PBS is American Public Broadcasting. Think the BBC, okay? Excuse me as I take a drink. So we have 160 stations across the country, headquartered right outside of DC. So That all comes into play because I was at a local PBS station in Charlotte, North Carolina, at the end of February 2020, the week before the world changed. I think we all know what happened going forward. I was there with some colleagues from DC, and we were doing a multi-day workshop. And I was there to test out some ideas I had around, wouldn't it be great if I didn't have to constantly be telling people what I'm talking about when it comes to data? At that point in time, I was the director of analytics at PBS. And so I was like, let me take this opportunity with this small group to try out some ideas I have. And one thing you need to know about PBS, when we have workshops, meetings, one thing we love, roundtables, right? We all get together at the end. Hey, what did you learn? What did you like? What are you taking back to your role? And that is when I heard it, that it being a rather surprising roundtable admission. At my table, we're talking about data because that's what I was there to talk about. And one of the employees at that local station says, they're fairly young and fairly new at the station, said, look, this is all well and good. I'm interested, I guess, in what you heard, but guess what? I'm a video producer and I don't need data to do my job. Just don't need it. Which, whoa, right? And to compound that whoa factor, this person's boss, well, rather, everybody at the station's boss, was sitting at that table. The station general manager, which is essentially the CEO, was sitting there, and her face and Keanu's face were like a perfect match, right? Just absolutely flabbergasted. Now, flabbergastion aside, maybe that is shocking to hear that people are just so overt about like, who cares about data? Like, I've got my job, it doesn't impact me whatsoever. But actually, that is a pretty common thought. And the reason I know that is that tons of people have told me specifically before any of our data literacy experiences that we built and launched at PBS, we had all sorts of, we would do surveys, ask people, hey, what are your thoughts on your data skills, your data level? How is data being used or thought about at your station or in your role? And most people came back and said, well, actually, I don't really like it. I'm pretty uneasy about it. And we'd actually hear a lot of, I'm scared of it. There's too much. I don't know what to do. So I do my best to ignore it. And hopefully, I'll be okay. But that is where data literacy can come in, right? Data literacy is a perception shifter. It can take those sort of mindsets and help people get over that hump to become confident with data, less afraid, right? Oh, I don't know how to find this or what it means, to I'm going to go look for this and I'm going to figure out what it means. So when we're talking about data literacy, who is this for, right? Is it just for you or your team? No, it's for your peers, it's for your manager, and it's for your senior level folks as well. Data literacy is for everyone. But that being said, what is it? What are we talking about here, right? Is it simply a buzzword, right? Oh, data literacy, we're just going to plop it up here on the big data bingo card with all these other things that have been, sort of all the rage and then, maybe have sort of fallen to the wayside. Some not. Is it a pithy statement that we get to throw around at conferences and webinars that sounds super smart, like, oh, data is the new oil, or if you want to be a contrarian, data is not the new oil? Is it a specific set of tech skills? Okay, we're going to make sure everyone is data literate, so everyone in the conference room, bring your laptops. No one leaves until you know how to build dashboards and stuff in Tableau and do VLOOKUPs, et cetera, et cetera. Is it, even though I said data literacy is for everybody, is it the same for everybody? Is the goal then to turn everybody in your organization into an analyst, is at the end of the day, are we trying to turn your CEO into a spreadsheet fiend? No, we are not. So then, in the immortal words of Faith No More, what is it? Now, the definition that I like is that data literacy is the ability to read, work with, analyze, and communicate with data. Okay. I like to throw a fifth plank in here as well after listening to some of my peers and some other folks that are much smarter than me just really talk about there is a superpower that lies in working with data, and that superpower is influence. The ability to influence the decision-making process, influence your peers, especially in organizations where you may not have direct oversight over people, but you need to get them to do things, right? And that is important, and it's the key to successful leadership, okay? Data literacy can also help establish baselines. And by that, I mean my sort of entry into data literacy, one moment, came from a place of frustration. Again, as the director of analytics, fancy title, but at a nonprofit, right? I was an individual contributor. And what that meant was without fail, every Friday at 4:45, here come the requests. Here come the data requests. Hey, can you update this? Hey, what does this mean? Especially if I had something to do at 5:30. I guarantee you I was never going to get there on time. And my idea, my sort of initial bright idea around data literacy was I'm going to take every single question I've ever been asked and I'm going to write it in a Google Doc and I'm just going to put an answer. I'm essentially going to create the world's longest FAQ page. Bam, done. I've solved all the problems. Spoiler alert, no, I did not solve the problems. That didn't necessarily work out the way I had anticipated, but the idea there is still powerful, right? What if instead of spending time trying to find things, trying to understand them, trying to get them updated, if people in your organization all operated at a slightly higher level, think how much more time could be spent on higher level business questions than the very simple what changed, what happened, where did it happen questions that you may normally get. And very much at that point in time, I was. Data literacy can empower your teams and your organization, right? Speeding up that time to decision making, if you can cut out all of the running around trying to find things and understand them, is really important and can be really impactful. I look at it as, can I get my team to move from, hey, Joe, what's happening? Hey, Joe, I saw this changed. What should we do about it? What do you think is next? Instead, they come to me and say, look, hey, here's what happened. Here's why it happened. And oh, yeah, guess what? Here's what we should be doing about it. Okay. That is taking a lot of that heavy thinking off your plate and sharing the burden. And so we're all sort of moving forward together. Another one of my sort of driving principles and urges behind doing this is being able to, for people in meetings to be able to prove their point in a succinct manner, right? Instead of 45 minutes of circumlocution where people are just round and round and round and then we don't get anywhere, actually coming to the table and saying, hey, look, X marketing plan did Y, and now we're going on to Z. That is, I think, the sort of the broader sort of business desire. My desire was, can we see less terrible presentations? And I have sat through many, many, many terrible visualization or data visualizations in meetings, and they instantaneously derail meetings. That happened to me in my first meeting with our brand new COO a few years ago. I thought I had made a pretty clear bar chart, and we spent 30 minutes talking about it. And let me tell you, I have never forgotten, and my bar charts are wildly different now than they were then. But you want to avoid either A, completely derailing the conversation, or I think even worse is when everyone just pulls out their phone and then you or whomever on your team is speaking and no one is paying attention, right? So with that in mind, here's why you should care. And now I maybe get the sense, I can't see you, but maybe there are some people looking at the screen thinking, okay, this guy said he is a data person. We have yet to see any data. Valid criticism, but guess what? Here it is. Here's some numbers, right? 11%, 26%, 32%, 89%. We can all agree that these are numbers. Well, what's behind them? Let's look. 11% of employees are confident in their data literacy skills, but 26% of leaders think their staff are proficient with data. So already there's sort of a mismatch. A third of senior leaders are viewed as data literate. So even employees are like, I don't know if our leaders really even know what they're talking about. 9 out of 10 leaders want their teams to back up their decisions with data. Okay. So we are talking about a pretty big disconnect here in terms of how people are thinking about it and being able to really utilize these skills. And it's not just a top-down phenomenon, okay? It's bottom-up as well, because employees that have the skills, data literacy skills, are lapping those who don't, and the people that don't are jealous, right? They want those skills, right? They're seeing their their fellow workers get ahead, and they also want to get ahead, which is leading to people leaving their jobs because they want these skills. They want training, okay? Look, the results don't lie, okay? People just are not data literate. They're going with their gut for decision making more so than actual data. So the first time I ever did this at a conference last year, I was keynoting the Marketing Analytics and Data Science Summit here in DC, and I'd never done that before. And so I asked some people in my peer group to just like, hey, I've seen you keynote, you do a great job. How do you do it? And they said, oh, look, you have to be positive, you have to be optimistic, you have to look towards the future. And I'm not sure that I maybe have done that yet, right? Like I've just shared a slide where people are not data literate. But guess what? I fooled you because this is actually great news. All right. This is the sound of opportunity knocking. Okay. This is a potential chance for you to maybe take something that does not exist or does in a loose affiliation at your organization and put some shape and some context around it and put your name on it and drive it in your organization. Okay. Are you having people leave because they're looking for these skills or they feel like they're not able to work with data? Well, welcome to your new retention tool. Okay. Do you have people in your organization that are constantly in conflict over what things mean? What is a user? What is a click through? What is completion? Whatever the metrics happen to be, even what the KPIs are. Guess what? Now we're all heading in the same direction, right? This is an opportunity to build confidence in your organization among staff and leadership, okay? And so I'm taking this opportunity to tell you that this is your chance to become the data literacy champion your organization didn't know it needed, okay? Which is what I did when we built the data literacy program at PBS. Now, I want to be clear, this was not the Joe Miscavige show, okay? This was not a solo endeavor by any stretch of the imagination. It was myself and two other folks originally. We call ourselves the Data Literacy Tripod. Get a catchy name, it helps. We had executive support and executive sponsors who luckily we're not in the weeds with us. They trusted us enough to build and come to them with strategic questions or some potential directional questions, but they were there to clear roadblocks and give us the time and space. And we also worked with an outside vendor, which was key, and I'll speak about them in a little bit. But this program was incredibly impactful in a number of ways. one of those ways, there was this guy named Colby at our Alabama station who had rarely worked with data at all in his role. After coming through one of our data literacy programs, he said that data literacy has impacted my work in every way imaginable. What we're talking about here is nothing short of a culture shift. And then I beat my data drum in every single meeting I'm in, every project I work on, and in every water cooler conversation I have. And that is really, really impactful, right? That is a person saying, here's this thing that I have done and has helped me. Okay. So how did we do it? Right. Well, from the beginning, ideas. Okay. My original FAQ idea, a bad one, but it was still an idea. Luckily, one of the executive sponsors, my direct supervisor at that point in time, much smarter than I am, much more strategic, said, okay, maybe down the road we'll do that. But what we're really trying to do here is we're trying to build capacity within the public media system. We want to sort of raise the bar, raise all boats in some fashion. How are we going to do it? That was my team's charge. And after thinking about it for a while, we came up with our elevator pitch, okay, the 3 E's. And that our guiding principles were going to be that we were going to equip, we were going to empower, and then we were going to elevate the public media system with data literacy skills, which again, we're talking about reading, working with, analyzing, and communicating with data. Earlier, I said that PBS, we love roundtables. That is true, but we love one thing more than roundtables, and those are surveys. We survey our viewers, we survey our members, and we survey each other all the time. And that's what we did here. We put together a survey for the public media system, thousands of people, and we asked them, what do you think about if you had to rate your data, just data knowledge, data skills, where would you put them? How much, what sort of roles are you in where you are either using data or wish you had the ability to do it? And then we ask those same questions about just the station overall, right? Is your station utilizing data to inform their decision-making process? Or are they just going with, well, that's what we always did, so I guess we'll just keep doing it, even if the data says otherwise? So while that survey was in the field, the business intelligence group that I was a part of at PBS headquarters, being the de facto sort of data leaders in the space, we got together for a day and had a data literacy workshop where we, among other things, put together a list of, okay, if we were to create the perfect data literate public media employee, what are the skills that they would have? Okay. And so taking that information and taking some information from the surveys that we had started to get back, we started to launch products. Okay. And it's great to think of these as products, right? Because then you can just talk about them and like, hey, look at these products I built. And there's a whole sort of life cycle and mindset around talking about how those are successful. And the original idea was data literacy was going to be a sort of self-contained 3-hour pre-conference workshop at our 2 annual PBS conferences. And so we were gearing up for that. Those conferences tend to happen in March and May. Again, March 2020, not a lot of conferences happening. So we had to pivot. And that's where we landed on the idea of our data literacy boot camp, where we, instead of doing in person, because we couldn't, it was impossible, we blocked out a week during the summer, an hour a day, and we started talking about some fundamental ideas that we had about sharing, right? This was very much, even though we were there to educate and we were there to sort of start to seed the ground with what we were going to be doing next in terms of data literacy, it was very much okay, let's see how this goes because we're not really sure. And it turned out to be a great success because we ended up doing, I think, 5 editions of this summer boot camp. one other thing that's worth noting, I had said earlier that it wasn't just our data literacy tripod and our executive sponsors that were working here. We also had vendors, and they were in that earlier workshop, and they were in the background of this whole boot camp, right? Silently lurking. Now, not in a creepy fashion, of course, but the idea was that we really needed them to understand how we as a public media, nonprofit, federated system spoke to each other, okay? And that is really key because we could have had any vendor come in and be like, oh yeah, of course we'll put together a data literacy program for you. And maybe they have, but it's only been for e-commerce companies, right? And they're just like, oh, we'll swap out their logo and put your logo in, we're good to go. This was built organically from the ground up. It took us about 9 or 10 months to really build the content that we landed on, that we had. Um, and that content was about 9 different modules, and areas of data literacy. So I'm gonna stay here for a second because there's a lot to sort of go through. Um, so the idea was, okay, nobody has a ton of time, okay? Nonprofits, public media, notoriously understaffed. You're doing 3 jobs at the same time. No one has time to watch hours of video at a clip. So we thought, okay, we said, all right, what we're gonna do is we're gonna make bite-sized videos. We're gonna bring in subject matter experts from our vendor group to make anywhere from like 2 to 7 videos that range from about 3. I think the longest one we had was about 7 or 8 minutes long. And we're gonna have those videos, and we're gonna group them up. And the idea is these videos will be available in these modules for people to consume, on their lunch break or whatever. Which sounds all well and good and is essentially like, hey, you just built LinkedIn Learning, which is really good shorthand to get people to understand what we're talking about. The problem with that is, when is the last time you remembered anything you had seen from a LinkedIn Learning course more than a week later? Okay. So this was a good start, but we really wanted to build, community here. Again, we are early days of the pandemic. Everyone is at home. Everyone is sort of figuring out what life is like now. And so we had this content, and the next idea was, okay, we're not going to do this individually. We are going to build out a cohort experience where people will do this and experience this together. And the way that we built that cohort experiences is we reached out to the leaders, the general managers, the CEOs of every public media station in the country, 160, depending on who's counting, and said, we are launching a first of its kind data literacy program in January of 21. I think it's 21. If there is someone at your station who you feel would benefit from this or is an emerging leader, please nominate them to apply for the program. We got about 75 responses. We whittled that down to about 24, and our first cohort experience was built. It was 6 months long, and everyone they did about 2 modules per month, and at the end of the month, we had a different subject matter expert come in. We all got together on, name your video platform of choice in 2021. And we got together and they covered a different aspect of, let's say, analytics for executives and analytics for managers than what was in the recorded modules. Okay. So again, great, tremendous feedback. But again, are we just watching videos together online, right? That's, I guess, better, but not what we were really hoping for. So the sort of the linchpin here is reinforcement. Okay, so there was always a system of discussion boards, right? What are we talking about? What did you learn? Talk to us about what you heard. We did social hours, right? If for nothing else than to just build some community. Hey, you're at this station, I'm at this station. What are you working on? Oh, wow, I'm working on that too. Okay. Um, those modules, we really built that out like a grad school class. It wasn't just a page of videos, there was video, there was text. We had quizzes, we had tests, and it all culminated in a capstone project. We split the cohort up, gave them case studies that they worked on for a month, and they presented to PBS senior management. Um, how did it work out? Well, one of our members of that first group from New York said that it was the favorite part of the program. It was enlightening to realize how much she had learned from the program and was able to put into use right away. It really helped to solidify the concepts. Okay. So reinforcement, it's not just watching videos, it's not just group work, but it's actually doing the work at the end. Um, and while this was all going on, I mean, we are data people, so we were measuring, okay? And it wasn't just that initial intake, tell us about your experience and where you think your skills are. It was once the experience closed, it was 6 months later, it was a year later, it was 2 years later to find out, is this still useful? Are you still using it? What do you wish we had done instead? What did you really like? And we were able to take that constant stream of feedback and iterate. Okay. Again, we're talking about products here. So we're iterating. Um, for our boot camp, people thought, hey, 5 days, way too long. So we trimmed it back to 4 days, and people were like, oh, this is great, but actually we would love multiple tracks. And so we built in additional tracks. The cohort experience was originally 6 months long. People said it's not long enough. We want more time to work on the case study. So we bumped it out to 7 months. Um, one of the things that we heard from the feedback pretty constantly was we want more tech skills. We want hard skills. The challenging thing with something as complex as and far-flung as the public media workforce is there is no set skill level, right? There's people doing jobs, learning on the job, things they already know, things they have no idea exist. So we really had to see what bubbled up the most. And the thing that we kept hearing over and over again was we want more help with social media and we want more help with dashboarding. Um, so we went back to those vendors and we built out some courses around both of those topics. The challenge there is that once you do that stuff, A, it's frozen in amber forever. And B, I guarantee you, whatever platform you had just created training materials for will change the following week. It was 2 weeks for us when Google, I've already forgotten what they used to call it, transitioned into Data Studio. And we had to make a decision. Were we going to go change all these videos, all this content we had spent a year making, and we decided not to. Right decision, wrong decision, it's anyone's guess. But what does this look like, right? So from our original boot camp, right, 4 days or 5 days, we ended up moving over to, a 4-day module, a series of modules where we talked about a whole bunch of topics. And a lot of these were after each boot camp, people were like, we want to hear more about X. And that's what we tried to build towards. It's also important to know that you can always partner with people that know more than you. We did not know everything in this space. No one can. And so for our first annual meeting that we had post-pandemic last year, we partnered with data storytelling guru Brent Dykes to come in and lead a data storytelling workshop, which went pretty well. It was the highest attended session and the highest rated session of the entire week. People are keenly interested in these skills and this knowledge and acquiring it. So all of this led to what? Well, it led to over 93% of PBS stations having participated in a data literacy experience. That's over 600 people, not just in headquarters, but across the country. 83% of stations have increased their strategic focus on data. 70%. What's up? Oh, sorry. And 70% of participants have described their data skills as improved or much improved. And these are results that resonate with senior management. Our CMO stood up on stage at that very same annual meeting and said that data literacy was one of his core focuses for the next year. Our CEO at the end of our last boot camp said, in part, data literacy is essential to the future of public media. Okay. But that's all sort of at the macro level. Okay. What about the people that went through it? What was their experience like? Well, Daisy from our station in Houston had just started a new role at her station when she had started the cohort program. And she said that it was impactful, okay, which is always good to hear. It helped her reach goals in her new role. It helped her identify new KPIs, which, as someone who teaches analytics and measurement, and also works on building them in his day job, KPIs can be such a quagmire, right? So the fact that she was able to use this knowledge to help identify new ones is great. Um, Helped her build out some strategy. I guarantee you, I did not put this next one in here for this presentation. This has been in here since last year. It helped her test and implement ideas in her new role. But to me, most importantly, it gave her that confidence, not just in her role, to be able to use data to be able to really flourish. Um, a friend of mine named Kirby from our Rocky Mountain PBS station called it a catalyst for career growth. Okay. And that's not just hyperbole. He went from a director role to the C-suite in 3 years with the data literacy program smack dab in the middle. Now, I would love to say that I am solely responsible for Kirby's ascension to, the C-suite. He hasn't told me otherwise, so I will likely take credit for it. But he did say that it allowed him to show off his leadership skills in his station, and that he was able to support colleagues in new ways that he hadn't before. But ultimately, it gave him the data storytelling skills that are crucial in his role as chief revenue officer. In a nonprofit, being able to connect donor dollars to impact is essential. Why should I give you any more money? I gave you a bunch of money last year. What happened with it? Right. And now being able to say, well, you gave us money. We were able to measure that it's had this impact on local literacy programs. That's a powerful story to be able to tell. And that's a good segue into the next piece here, which I'm not going to talk about terribly long, but data literacy, or really anything you are passionate about in your role that is perhaps not in your job description, can really be a career booster. It was for me. I had been at PBS for 10 years total. Um, I had gotten there in 2016, let's say 2016, and I'd gotten promoted fairly, in the next like year or two. Um, and then that was sort of the end of my upward progress. Like that was it. I had just like run into a wall and that was it. And I did not see a way forward. And it was incredibly frustrating. Uh, Personally, and also because I'm addicted to looking at LinkedIn and seeing everybody else get promoted was driving me nuts. Um, but this was something that, along with a couple of other items, I remember being in a meeting. One of our staff had left. She had been running one of our marquee data products, and she had left. And our manager, it was like 18 of us in a room. And my supervisor said, okay, so-and-so is leaving. Who wants to take over this project? And I didn't even think about it. I just raised my hand immediately. And I was like, I'll do it. Even though I didn't know how. And I certainly, I had contributed to it, but I was not aware of the nuts and bolts of making it work, which I would become intimately familiar with over the next few years. But all that to say, and with data literacy too, it's a way to raise your profile in your organization, to get people out of your direct line of sight aware of the work you do and the value you bring. with data literacy, it gave me something to own and point to and talk about, something that was successful that my boss, her boss, her boss's boss could all talk about. Okay. It's you, by helping others, you ultimately end up helping yourself. But I didn't approach this with that sort of ulterior motive. It was sort of where we landed. But it was a great way to also understand what it was I was really interested in doing and be able to pivot away from I'm the do the report guy, and which I was not happy with it any longer. Um, so being able to sort of turn my career and shape it a little bit with this and some of those other projects I had raised my hand with was really powerful. So there's a couple other items I just want to dive deeper on before I sort of wrap up, and these are quick. Um, Initial challenges. Okay. Um, if people are not familiar with data literacy, the first thing they're going to say is, "What are you talking about?" So having a handy definition or an example or two it goes a long way. Um, and if there's never been anything like this in your organization, it can be pretty easy to dismiss or put off to, oh well, we'll take a look at it next quarter, right? And then next quarter never comes. Um, and it might be the challenge is I don't know what this is exactly or what this is going to do for us, but like what is sort of the ROI for us? Um, and that can be challenging again, right? Being in data roles, if you're doing something that doesn't have an immediate impact on the bottom line, that can be a tough sell. Um, so I'm not going to lie, this is hard to measure. Impact is hard to measure in a nonprofit space or in a sort of intellectual. How much do we move the needle intellectually? Um, the surveys, right, or any sort of before and after that you can point to. Testimonials like the ones I've sort of peppered through here are really great to be able to tell the story and point to. Look, this is the impact that we are having with this. Okay. Um, and it also serves the purpose of having those testimonials, right? Having that survey, having those surveys, you are able to start to build a backbench of data literacy pros in your organization that you can lean on or bring into different experiences based on their subject matter expertise, right? They are skilled in sort of the broader ideas around data literacy, and they can then apply them to what they're doing and help sort of spread the word organically throughout the organization. And if anyone was curious about sort of the platforms and tools, again, in public media, we are not buying the most expensive things, but we use Canvas for building out the course. We used Slack for communicating amongst the cohort and the boot camp. We used Slido, which was pretty cool when we had the boot camp just to get people more engaged so they weren't just have it on the background and go do other things, right? Lets them engage a little bit more, which is important. We recorded the vast majority of our video content in QuickTime, and I think a little bit in Capterra, I think, from the vendor side. And lastly, we used Hopin, I think it's now owned by Ring Central, for our bigger boot camp experiences in the summer, which had a much heavier, the cohort experience was maybe anywhere from 18 to 24 people. The boot camp could be upwards of 300 people, 200, I think. So now you're like, okay, I'm super jazzed about this. What can I do about data literacy? So one more bit of and slightly not the best news is that there's no one right answer here. I'm sorry. I wish there was. Data literacy is a bit of an amorphous blob. However, the things you can do. You can get excited, right? Like this is something that I could do or lead and make an impact at my at my business or with my team or in my unit, whatever, right? That's really cool, right? Being able to say at the end of the day, I did this thing, that's awesome. Lastly, you can start reading. I didn't know anything beyond the phrase data literacy, right? Again, I was the FAQ guy. So I just started reading everything I can get my hands on in this space. You can find all that content at this link, which will stay up through the rest of the very few slides that we have. There's books, articles, videos, all sorts of content there. These slides are there. My contact information is there. Assess your needs. Okay. Who are we talking about? Who are we trying to build a data literacy program or experience for? Your direct reports, your broader team, your entire unit, what? That will help you get your arms around this a little bit. And champion the idea, right? You're excited, funnel that excitement into here's why we should do this thing. Okay. Feel free to use any of these slides or anything I've talked about here, right? Hey, PBS did it. Here's what success looked like there. We could easily double that here. Okay. And to that end, reach out. Okay. I'm always happy to talk about data literacy. Again, my contact information should be in that link. Feel free to reach out. And lastly, go for it. Okay. I'm sure I don't have to tell you all, but where you start and where you end are wildly different. If that first experience in North Carolina around some data literacy ideas was where it had started and ended, that would have been it, right? But there was, while that wasn't the ideal experience, there was a kernel of something there, and we just sort of kept chipping away at it and trying to build onto it. And I encourage you to do the same. So speaking of North Carolina, let's hop in our time machine and go all the way back to February 2020, back to that station, back to that roundtable, and back to that flabbergasted station manager. And so she's sitting there, she's looking at this employee, and she takes a beat and she goes, look, I get what you're saying, okay? But instead of saying, I don't need data to do my job, how about you say or think, how can I use data to do my job better? And I don't think that there is a better summation of data literacy than that. So that being said, here is that resources link again. Contact info here. If anybody is interested in perhaps chatting afterwards, I'll be open to new opportunities in mid-November. Otherwise, thank you all for your time and your attention, and I will stop sharing the screen now.
Nope, keep it open.
Oh, yes.
You can see your screen.
Yeah.
Thank you, Joe. That was awesome. As always, thank you. Love that talk as much as I did last time. And you expanded a little bit on it. It was really good. So the resources QR code also has the contact information and all the research that you did on data literacy.
That's correct, yes.
Awesome. Does anybody have any questions for Joe? Mel, I saw you come off mute.
I was just going to say thank you.
Absolutely.
I'll allow it. Anybody else before I talk about upcoming TLC stuff? I don't want to.
That's
Not
quite
so
the
much a
resource list.
question.
I'm sorry?
Not so much a question. Just more of a after all was said and done, all of the individuals who were kind of naysayers, did you kind of go back and do that survey again and see like I did see the individual survey responses, but like how the percentages may have changed on who was using data versus not?
Yeah, we tended to. I don't have a slide on that. That's a good point. I should have that. But we tended to see more a positive impact and people responding more positively, both at the broader station level, but then also at their individual role level.
I'm in a little different situation, and maybe we can talk afterwards because I know we're coming up on time, but the organization that I'm in right now is the most data literate, the most data savvy, almost overly so, that I've ever worked with. But one of the things that my team is struggling with is the balance between self-service and full service.
Ooh.
And so I would, yeah, that's a topic that I would love to discuss with anyone who's willing.
Yeah, maybe we'll hop over to Slack and have a whole little
Yeah.
conversation about it, because that is definitely how
Because
to.
they want all of the data, all of it. And not everybody is an analyst by nature. So
And
the
then cherry picking
interpretation,
happens.
yeah. It's not like in my current situation, it's not bad cherry picking. It's just the interpretation is some, depending on how people's brains work, they interpret things different ways.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I see people exiting, and I just want to say very quick before other people do jump. We have Georgiev coming November 1st. He's going to be talking about observed power, temptations and misunderstandings. And then Jen Kuntz is back December 13th with her talk on The Emperor Has No Clothes, misleading narratives on cookies and consent. So I'll share that also over on the planning channel for anybody who missed out. But thanks again, Joe. And in case y'all missed it, Joe's open to new opportunities as of November 18th. So share the word, and we love you, Joe. Great job. Thanks
Thank you
all.
so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Have a good
Have a
weekend,
great
everyone.
weekend.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.